So protein is really important from, for a number of different things, both health and performance-wise. So from a health point of view, our body needs protein and amino acids to support bone cell development, hair growth, skin cells. Every part of our body needs protein to support cell turnover. It's also important from a recovery point of view because it will, as I said, support the sort of muscle cells turning over as well and supporting muscle synthesis as well. So protein requirements for cyclists and endurance athletes is, generally about 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Now, your total amount of protein is important, but also the spread of protein over the day is just as important. So protein is used by a number of different, things in the body, as we've discussed. However, from a muscle intake point of view, your muscles can only absorb about 40, depending on how much muscle mass you have, somewhere between 20 to sort of 45 grams of protein at a single meal. So if we're eating protein only at one meal, we're missing out on the benefits of eating it across the day as well. So protein distribution is really important, and that's why, having 3 or 4 protein-rich meals over the day is important, so we can spread that out, in 20 to sort of 40 gram serves over the day.
Should you be consuming protein during your ride then?
I've played around with this for a few different athletes. Protein during short intensity rides has not really been shown to have any benefit for higher intensity shorter rides. For really long rides, so I generally start to add protein into athletes and cyclists sort of on bike nutrition around about the 5 hour plus mark. And again, this is very dependent on the athlete and dependent on what they're aiming for. I find that by just consuming carbohydrates, sometimes that they can feel sort of empty in the gut. So it's almost from a comfort point of view, but it's just being mindful that we're using, again, easy to digest protein foods. If the rides are sort of consistently going over that 5 to 6 hour mark, I think it is beneficial from a muscle sort of point of view, from a recovery aspect, that we are incorporating some amino acids throughout the session. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but if we're thinking about the day and trying to spread protein over the day, and you're going out for 6 hours plus on the bike, it is going to be beneficial from a recovery point of view and a lean mass point of view to incorporate some protein.
So does the protein help prevent muscle breakdown during the longer rides?
Yes, absolutely. The carbohydrate is still the number one thing to be focusing on, and making sure that you've got adequate carbohydrates, because by adding protein in, if we still don't have enough carbohydrates, then it's more likely that we're going to start using muscles as fuels, essentially, in a non-scientific way. However, it is going to be important from an overall recovery point of view that we're using protein sort of partway through. And again, it doesn't need to be a lot, but just a small dose, somewhere between the 10 to 20 sort of gram hit should be enough, and a couple of times over a really long ride.
You mentioned the 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein you should be having in your general cycling diet. But what happens when you go into like a deeper training phase, or even adding gym into the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So particularly when we start adding strength training into a program, there are times where I would recommend over that 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So maybe up to 2.2 grams in really high intense training blocks. But more so when we start incorporating some strength training, I might go from anywhere from that 1.8 to 2. Above that, we don't necessarily need to. There's no further sort of evidence to support recovery if we're going above that sort of 2.2 for cycling, that is. Different sports can be slightly different, but for a cycling program, I usually have most of my clients anywhere from 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, dependent on the training block that they're currently in and dependent on if they're incorporating any other training, so strength training, for example.
So post-ride recovery strategies, what would you be having?
So general rule of thumb post-ride would be incorporating 20 to 30 grams of protein and roughly 50 grams of carbohydrates quite quickly. Now this is where chocolate milk kind of got its famous name for recovery. So obviously it has a sugar content to it, so we're incorporating 50 grams of carbohydrates quite easily from a 600 ml sort of chocolate milk. And then it includes roughly about that 20 grams of protein, dependent on the brand. And it's also a fluid, so it's got a sodium content to it, which is typically higher than a lot of sports drinks as well. So we're kind of getting in those 3 R's of recovery, which are refuel with carbohydrates, repair with protein, and then rehydrate with fluid. But that's only one option. I've said that to some people and then they start drinking loads of chocolate milk. And so everyone's going to be different, whether they, one, like chocolate milk, or two, can they tolerate dairy and things like that. So other options may be a high protein yogurt with a piece of fruit or a couple of bits of toast. Again, that's more of a snack type meal. And we're looking at a higher protein yogurt to try to get to that sort of 20 grams of protein. Some people love using their protein powders and protein shakes. Again, coupling that with muesli bar, a piece of fruit, or a main meal type of option. So, you know, that's where eggs on toast with some anti-inflammatory fats from, say, avocado and veggies would come in handy. And then, you know, other things like baked beans on toast with veggies and eggs added to it would be fantastic. Good quality mueslis with yogurt and fruit. So a range of different options, but from a snack point of view, ideally in that first kind of 30-60 minutes, we want 20 grams worth of protein, 50 grams worth of carbohydrates as a minimum. I'm a big fan of incorporating different protein sources, and generally I'll work with the athlete and their individual preferences to come up with that plan. But I guess my general philosophy around food is predominantly based with fish, incorporating some red meat in there, and then incorporating some plant-based sources as well. So using legumes and lentils and things like that as well as an option. And don't forget, you know, eggs are fantastic sort of protein source, even over dinner meals and things like that as well. So I like including a range of different proteins, and that's to sort of tick off other types of vitamins and minerals that are coming from various types of proteins. But our Western diet is typically quite low in fish, so I'm a big fan of encouraging increasing sort of fish intake, particularly salmon and oily fish.
Like you said, the Western diet don't really incorporate fish. I barely ever eat fish. Why should we be incorporating this into our diets?
So there is different types of fish as well. So ideally trying to incorporate more oily fish into the diet. So things like salmon, mackerel, tuna as well. So, and the reason for that is the omega-3 fatty acid component, and particularly the DHA component. Lots of research around supporting recovery from an anti-inflammatory effect, but also cognitive function and overall cardiovascular health or heart health as well. So loads of benefits. I guess the challenge is the environmental impacts of including more fish, and then there's, you know, microplastics often in fish intake as well. So we just need to be mindful that everything is in moderation and balance, but I generally try and recommend 2 to 3 serves of oily fish over the week, and a serve being roughly 120 to 150 grams per portion.
So to summarise this, what would be the 3 main things for protein intake?
The top 3 things to focus on with protein is 1, getting enough in over the day, so your total protein requirement. And again, for cyclists, anywhere, you know, as a guide, 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight would be great, but anywhere from that 1.2 up to sort of 2, dependent on your training load and other aspects of your life. And that's why working with a sports dietitian can be really useful, is to figure out exactly what your requirement is. The other important factor is the type of protein, so trying to include a mixture of different proteins where you can, so that whether that's from a combination of animal-based products as well as plant sources, and that's to tick off a range of different other vitamins, minerals and micronutrients. And then distribution over the day is very important as well, so trying to incorporate 3 to 4 main meals with a 20 to 40 gram hit of protein, and then some snacks in there if need be. But generally, those 3 things are going to cover off on your main priorities for protein intake, both sort of for athletic performance and then generalized health as well.